Phantasy Star gets a sequel already? Welcome to the world, or rather, worlds, of Rieko Kodama on Segaiden episode 75. So, I had intended for this sidebar on 1998's Japan-exclusive Mark III releases to be just a couple of episodes long. But I'm afraid that process has expanded into a much longer endeavor than I had ever dreamed, because I keep stumbling across really interesting games that I kind of want to take a deep dive into. Such as this week's game, Hoshi o Sagashite, the first Master System, Mark III game to dare to include an ellipse in the title. Really, there's not much to Hoshi o Sagashite, which roughly translates to Searching for the Stars. It's probably better known in the West as The Story of Mio, which is the sole piece of English text to be found in the game, and which Western fans have adopted as an informal title, for example in the fan translation that I've used for this episode. If you know what you're doing, you can blow through the entirety of The Story of Mio in about half an hour. That would be kind of missing the point though. I mean, you can breeze through Myst in about 5 minutes if you know what you're doing too, but you'd miss out on the entire world and lore in the process, so why even bother? The Story of Mio doesn't have anywhere near the depth of Myst's world. It barely has any puzzles to speak of. Still, this is a charming little graphical adventure that invites you to poke around its world and drink in what details you can dredge up. It's probably the lowest stakes story you'll play on Master System. There are no demon kings to slay, or rebellions to join in the fight against tyranny. You do not control a legendary hero, no worlds are threatened, and you don't touch a single weapon. No, in The Story of Mio, you take on the role of a young man who arrives at planet Elam to visit his girlfriend Lila and buys her a weird egg as omiyage. Truly, this was a game looking ahead to the future, able to predict a terrible time in human history where eggs are treated as valuable treasure. This egg is a little different from Eggland's best though, and its strange nature sets into motion a miniature adventure that sends the unnamed protagonist across a star system in search of answers. The planet-hopping structure and science fiction nature of The Story of Mio call to mind Phantasy Star, and again, that's probably no coincidence. The lead designer behind this adventure was none other than Rieko Kodama, whose previous project had been working on Phantasy Star as its lead artist. In a lot of ways, The Story of Mio feels like a side story to that earlier game. As it happens, the Phantasy Star series would directly spawn several so-called text adventures, all of which play more or less like The Story of Mio, with simple, menu-driven commands accompanied by narrative text and static images of places and characters. The Story of Mio doesn't carry over any characters or plot beats from Phantasy Star, but it does make explicit references to locations in that game. And Mio itself is a yellow cat-like creature with wings whose name sounds suspiciously similar to Myau. Of course, the game also references a few other Sega games. You might spot a sign advertising Club Space Harrier, and the guy selling Mio's egg also sells quote-unquote freaky eggs, tiny little eggs which appear in a row and are said to be very clingy, following along behind you forever. The references don't stop there though. The quote-unquote ethnic-looking guy who sells you Mio's egg also offers a gremlin egg for sale, in case you were wondering about the central inspiration behind this tale. And as in that movie, once you acquire the egg and give it to your girlfriend, the real story kicks off. The Mio egg hatches, prompting you to figure out the proper habitat and diet for what turns out to be an endangered species believed to have entirely died off through human predation. Ultimately, the game simply comes down to making your way across different worlds in order to learn more about Mio, the species, and return Mio, the creature, to the environment where it belongs. Although you don't have to fight monsters or worry about dying here, there are a few game over possibilities that you can stumble into by mistake, such as carelessly alerting a news agency to the existence of Mio, which will result in an ET-like ending where government agents take him into custody for study, minus the daring escape via bicycle. It's a simple, sweet tale, if one told a bit clumsily. The Story of Mio does not exactly demonstrate the most thoughtful design tendencies, as you might expect of an adventure game of this vintage. A lot of the story progression here boils down to trial and error, with much of the advancement hinging on players prompting the same character for conversation multiple times in a row. This comes off as fairly artificial in nature, since every time an NPC responds to your queries, they give you terse, one-line responses. The game would save you a lot of hassle by allowing characters to express more than a single thought per response, but I suppose that would make for an even shorter game. So we make do. The story of Mio spans several worlds that involve our hero wandering around, speaking to people in order to reveal new dialogue prompts and destinations, and very rarely using commands like hit, eat, or item to move things forward. Some of those prompts require multiple uses as well, such as when you need to bribe an old lady by first showing her money and then giving her the money. Or the mysterious laser power source that you need to reveal inside of a science lab by striking its machine multiple times, despite your avatar telling you it's a terrible idea. Really, the one traditionally video game-like challenge in the story of Mio happens at the adventure's midpoint, where you need to answer questions in a fairly annoying quiz game that demands you memorize the visual particulars of incidental background details, like the number of twinkling stars during the interplanetary transition sequences, or the position of a certain character's arm. It's easy enough to blunder your way through these questions, as with the rest of the game, and the story of Mio is kind enough to provide you with a password system that allows you to shut down and resume the story from the precise point that you quit out. So even if you mess up, it's not exactly a harrowing experience. And that's fine. This feels less like a traditional adventure game at the time than it does a visual novel. Not that the term visual novel existed in the gaming lexicon back in 1988. And that seems fitting. I see the story of Mio less as a video game attempting to tell a story than I do as a story that happens to take the form of a video game. If anything, it feels very much like a 1980s era short-form manga or original animated video production that got confused about its medium and ended up in a video game cartridge. With a brief, gentle narrative that revolves around a young couple and the curious creature that unexpectedly enters their life, you could easily envision the story of Mio as a late bubble-era direct-to-video project. If you had wandered across a VHS tape of the story of Mio sitting on a Blockbuster shelf next to Spirit of Wonder, One Pound Gospel, or They Were 11 back in 1993 or so, it would have felt right at home. A cute little self-contained cartoon that didn't change the world or anything, but that went down easily, and nowadays calls to mind a bygone vintage anime boom era. If you've been paying attention here, you'll probably realize that I didn't pluck those particular OAV references out of the ether at random. All of those works either were created by women or featured female protagonists, and that makes them kindred spirits to the story of Mio. In addition to sporting art and design spearheaded by Rieko Kodama, the story of Mio stands out in the catalog of Sega's history for boasting a remarkably high percentage of staff consisting of women. 3 of the game's 5 staff members, whose real identities are known, rather than being hidden behind an unidentified alias, were women. That includes Miki Morimoto and Chie Yoshida, both of whom had previously worked with Kodama on Phantasy Star. Certainly many women worked in the video games industry back in the 1980s, but Sega does stand out in hindsight for its relatively large number of female-led productions, especially on the consumer side of their business. I don't want to wander into weird, stupid gender essentialism here, but I do think the perspective provided by the story of Mio's staff shows through. I mean, compare this game to another Hollywood-inspired futuristic graphical adventure that debuted a few months later, Hideo Kojima's Snatcher. Snatcher was a great game, but it has become somewhat infamous for its lechery. Protagonist Gillian Seed can ogle, grope, and peep on every woman he encounters. If you try to mishandle female NPCs in the story of Mio, they'll usually just call you a jerk, same as the men do. You can use the eat command on women if you like, but if that command yields results, they're always cute rather than pervy. Your girlfriend, Lila, will play it off by saying that she's so cute, you just want to eat her up. And if you try to use the eat command on certain other ladies, their responses will cause your poor, earnest protagonist to blush in embarrassment. It creates a real difference in tone from the subtle salaciousness of most other adventure games of this era, which seem to anticipate that they'll be played by teenage boys and young men who will try to get away with shenanigans and play up to their curiosity, even if the characters involved are, in fact, sentient pieces of fruit. In this day and age, it serves as a pleasant reminder that women have always had a place in video games and science fiction, no matter how much certain quarters of the internet scream and cry to the contrary. The story of Mio belongs to a long legacy of memorable, character-driven science fiction led by women. Like, Doctor Who co-creator Verity Lambert, or the women who kept Star Trek alive through fanworks and conventions during its 1970s nadir, like DC Fontana and Bijo Trimble, or Moto Hagio of the Year 24 group, or Well, anyway, you get the idea. The point is, the story of Mio has a totally different vibe from other sci-fi adventure video games of its era, yet it feels very much of a piece with the rest of Rieko Kodama's work. With its goofily unassuming protagonist and a cast of memorable weirdos and young women decked out in 1980s versions of futuristic fashion, the story of Mio fits right in with previous Kodama-drawn projects. The chunky pugilists of Champion Boxing, Alex Kidd's legally distinct rendition of Goku, the retro-future chic of Phantasy Star's cast. The story of Mio, aka Hoshi no Sagashite, makes for a great little chunk of Sega history, one that probably means more now in retrospect than it did in 1988. As a kinda sorta side story to Phantasy Star, a demonstration of a sadly departed creator's style, and a fresh take on a trendy genre that dares to offer something more than yet another murder mystery, the story of Mio is one of a kind. Like those standalone OAV tapes on the Japanese animation section of bygone rental shops, the story of Mio sticks around just long enough to make a positive impression without wearing out its welcome. I'd say they don't make them like this anymore, but honestly, they never did to begin with. Next time on Segaiden, okay, we're gonna wrap this up. Get ready for the last few Mark III exclusive stragglers.